So welcome everyone. Welcome. Kia ora, Nisambula Vinaka, Namaste, Assalamu alaikum, Malo Lele, Talofa, Noya, and warm Pacific greetings. It is warm in the Pacific. It's good to be here in Fiji. So it's my first time doing a webinar from Fiji, and I'm really excited about that. I'm really excited that you've all taken time out to join today. It's also our first webinar for 2022. So what we're going to do today is we've got a number of presenters, and it's going to be a very informal conversation with our presenters, kind of recapping some of the discussions that we've had last year, and which will then lead on to our monthly webinars for 2022. So before we start off, a few housekeeping rules. In true Pacific style, our webinars are quite informal. So we welcome a good talanoa. So please join the conversation. This is about learning from each other, sharing experiences, and bringing that into the Pacific context. So the more we share, the more we're going to learn. So I welcome opportunities for you to engage with us today, to share your experiences as we share our experiences. We also have a Facebook page, a Twitter page, a YouTube account, and a web page. What I'm going to ask you to do, I'm not on my computer, so I haven't shared all of those details. But what I'll ask you to do is to drop your email address into the chat box, and I will send details, and I will also send a certificate of participation, as we normally do, to you guys. So please send your email addresses in the chat box, and I'll get those out to you. So the other thing that we're going to be I'll also send out to you details of our next presentation. So I'll send out flyers, and we normally post these in our Facebook and our Twitter pages as well as a recording of all our webinars. So it's our way to keep engaged with you guys. And there are two ways to engage with this webinar as well. So we prefer that you unmute yourself and have a good talanoa with us. But if you feel a little bit shy and you don't want to have a chat with us, you can also put your question in the chat box or your comment, and I'll read them out loud. Finally, what I'll request everyone is, if you're not saying something, I'd request that you keep your mic on mute during presentation. So welcome everyone. It's great to see you, and we'll start off with our presentation. So as I said, it's an informal chat. We'll have our first presenter, Dr. Pranit Anand from Queensland University of Technology, who's going to share with us some of his experiences and what this means for the Pacific, or how these could be applied in the Pacific setting. So welcome, Pranit.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jalal, and welcome to everyone. I feel rather envious. It seems like most of you are in the beautiful, warm, humid place in Fiji, and I'm sitting here in cold Wollongong weather at the moment, so it's a bit of jealousy sort of sitting inside of me. But I am really excited to be here amongst our colleagues who share a similar sort of passion about teaching and learning, particularly within a Pacific context. As we've advertised kind of thing, what have we learned with online learning within a specific context. Now, my experiences are from my own work environment, which is at QUT in Brisbane. Some might consider it is part of the Pacific family. Some might consider might not be, depending on which way the ball rolls occasionally, where Australia sits as part of the Pacific family. But in any case, it is a personal experience, and quite likely some of these experiences are very similar to most of yours as well. One of the things that the pandemic has shown us with online learning, well, first of all, online learning is possible. That's something that we have very much learned. We were almost pushed in that direction without any choice, screaming and shouting in many cases, but we got there and we made it work. So online learning is possible. But one of the things that we have realized, and this is the sentiment that's shared by my colleagues, is it's hard. Online learning is not easy. It's hard, right? And the reason why for many people it is hard is because we are trying to replicate a traditional face-to-face setting into an online environment. We are trying to translate what we've done in a physical environment into an online environment, and that's not quite possible all the time. I mean, there's a number of different challenges. So online learning is hard, and in order to make it work, there's quite a lot of work that is required on the part of the teachers, on the part of the facilitators. One of the things that we have noticed is educators, for example, in a face-to-face setting, we're quite comfortable. They rock up into a physical lecture hall, a physical tutorial room, and they chat to their students for an hour, for 2 hours, for example. And even if the students did not feel that they did anything, they just sat there, for example, the teachers felt that they did something useful. They felt good about themselves. Online learning has shifted that mindset, for example, so that as a teacher myself, for example, I need to re-engage with my students in different ways. So it could be, for example, being present in the discussion forums, answering to the emails at different times, for example, being flexible in when I receive assessments from my students. So a lot of things have changed, and again, it requires teachers to be responsive. So to me, that's the first lesson that we have learned out of the pandemic and working in an online environment. The other thing that comes to mind is we always knew that we have a huge diversity amongst our student populations, right? We know that all students learn differently, they engage with the content differently. We knew that all the time, but we didn't really pay much. Certainly for many educators, we didn't pay too much attention to that, right? But when we moved online, that really forced us to pay attention to the diversity that exists within a classroom. But at the same time, the reason why we were able to pay attention to that was online environment allows us to tap into the various analytics that was available to us. So various forms of student engagement: when do the students log in, which students logs in, which student looks at your recorded lectures, for example, how long does a student spend on listening to your recorded lectures, does Jane or Jill look at your tutorials, for example. Unlike a physical environment, the only thing that we relied on was eyeballing. So you're in a classroom, you look around, and you can see students head down, pen, paper, doing some work. That might be useful, for example, but in an online environment, we actually have hard data about that. So to me, that was quite useful. I'm not saying all educators are comfortable using that all the data there, but the more progressive educators do have access to the data, and then they can use the data to then inform and refine their delivery in appropriate ways to engage the diverse learners that exist in most classrooms. The other thing that a very important part that has come out of the whole online learning experience is refocus on assessments as well. So unlike in a physical environment, for example, quite often we had been using assessments that was designed 10, 20 years ago, not the actual assessment item itself, but the instrument. So if you were used to using an exam, that exam format had not changed. The questions probably changed, hopefully anyway, but we've always had exams. If you're using an essay, for example, we continue to use an essay. If you're using a report, we continue to use that as well. One of the things that has forced us to really look at, certainly in our case, with the online environment, is really look at our assessment instruments. Is exam the most relevant assessment instrument? Is an essay the most relevant assessment instrument? What about a report? What else can we do? Do we need to have that many assessments? Do we have to have that assessment? Is there some other way that the students can demonstrate their learning? You know what I mean? So it has allowed us to refocus and interrogate our assessment ideas to see what are different ways in which we can assess. There was a huge, and I'll be a little bit controversial over here and say, misconception about academic integrity, that you need to see your students doing an assessment in order to be confident that it's their own work. I think that idea, that paradigm has shifted a little bit. Many educators are now a little bit more comfortable with online environments, and not necessarily expecting to see students doing the work to be able to feel comfortable that it is their own work. So many of those ideas have shifted and sort of forced us to think in different ways as well. The implications of all of that, as we start to come out of the pandemic, for example, move away from the requirement to be online or forced to be online, for example, will have huge implications for the physical environment as well. I don't think physical in-class, face-to-face teaching will be the same anymore, because we have learned so much from the online environment that, and this is my genuine hope, that hopefully we can bring many of the things that we have done with the online environment to actually enrich our physical teaching experiences for many of the students as well. Look, I'll probably stop there for now, Jalal. I mean, there's a few other little bits and pieces that we can bring in as well, but I'm happy to sort of pass the baton on to somebody else, and maybe we can have a discussion either now or a little bit later around some of the things that I talked about.
Thanks, Pranit. That was wonderful. I mean, I think you touched on some of the things that we've all encountered over the last year and a half teaching online. And I think there's going to be a number of discussion comments around that. What we'll do is, does anyone have any burning comment or something that they want to share with us before we move on to our next presenter?
And as I mentioned earlier on, I'm particularly interested in listening from our students, actually the students' perspectives about online learning experiences. So if you were a student during this pandemic, please share your own experiences with us, either in the chat or just unmute yourself. That would be quite lovely. Thank you.
That would be great. Yeah, any students? Anyone wants to comment? Or maybe while you're thinking of some questions, or you want to share your experiences at the end, what we'll do is we'll probably get our next presenter, and it's going to be Pritika, who's going to have a short conversation with us around some of those student characteristics and what she's experienced during this last couple of years in teaching online.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammed. I hope you can hear me. Okay, so good evening, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Pranit, for sharing the facilitators' side of experience for online learning. So on my paper today, I have some experiences like Dr. Pranit, you mentioned you wanted to hear something from the students. So actually what happened, as a facilitator and uh, as facilitators, this team that we have at FNU and USP, we actually carried out a survey identifying the student perspective of how their experiences were during the online teaching and learning period. So we actually measured their experiences and their perception using 5 dimensions. First one was student characteristics. So we actually prepared this questionnaire, and for student characteristics, we looked at their digital competencies, computer self-efficacy, and their attitude and perception towards online learning. So this survey actually was carried out at 2 major universities, and I have responses from more than 500 students. So first of all, when we look at their digital literacy, yes, of course, students in the Pacific, they had issues with their digital skills. They faced a lot of issues in accessing the materials online, and some of them are related to the course design and the learning environment design. Probably they were not able to navigate, or they were not able to access the resources as easy as they thought it would be, and they lacked necessary skills in using Moodle, because both the universities are using Moodle. Also, we know that as facilitators, we give OERs, we give links, we give help videos, which some of the students were not able to access. So there was a very low digital competency amongst the students during this online phase. Computer self-efficacy, actually, when we look at computer self-efficacy, it's the students' eagerness to learn on their own using the digital tools and technologies. And the students that were surveyed, they also thought that if they were confident that they would be able to do a particular assessment using the online tools and technologies, they were able to, with help provided obviously from the facilitators. They had rather a positive attitude and perception about online learning. They felt that online learning was interesting. However, it was associated with how the course was designed and how much guidance they were provided during the online learning process. The second dimension was instructor characteristics. So when we look at instructor characteristics, we ask them about the course design, um, the regular updates and feedback, the online presence of the facilitator, and the help guides that were provided. And the students feel that if the course is designed properly, it's easy to navigate, the resources are provided to them right in front of their eyes, it becomes much easier for them to learn. Obviously, we upload the lecture notes. Together with that, we had Zoom classes, and then we uploaded the videos as well in both the universities that the survey was carried out. But when we look at assessment, sometimes we tend to just upload PDF documents. So what the students really want from the facilitators is that if they are uploading the PDF document, or let's say a Word document, they need visuals. They need a document which actually gives them a guideline with the visuals and instructions so that they can better understand the assessment. Also, they indicated that a video, probably with the facilitator being present in the video, would be of, uh, of a great help. The third dimension that we looked at was learning environment and design, the course design, objectives, navigation, assistive videos, and guides. So one of the main things that the students pointed out were the objectives for each topic. Sometimes we tend to ignore this. They would really want to know what are the objectives for each topic, and then it should be clearly outlined, probably beginning of the lecture or in the assessments that are given to them, so that they understand what they need to know about the topic and what is expected from them. Then obviously, as I have mentioned, the navigation, how the facilitators, they set up their course or their Moodle shells per week or throughout the semester, how they are interacting with the students, are they giving regular feedback, and where is that actually placed in the Moodle shell? Because sometimes we tend to place things under the current week, sometimes we tend to have a different tab for the assessment. Sometimes we just have a general forum where we post things for the students. So this might be confusing for them. So that comes as a design, and some students, they identified that the way their facilitators informed them about different assessments, or probably their grades, or the marks for their assessment was very difficult to navigate to. Use of assistive videos, for example, the external videos that the facilitators shared. Um, I think this one was the use of YouTube videos. And some of the students, we know that in the Pacific environment, we have connectivity issues. So that was one of the major challenges for the students to watch these assistive videos. Attend the lectures, and the softwares as well. If we look at the programming courses, if you look at the computing science and information system courses, they require special softwares, which should be obviously that should be open source. And if these softwares were not open source, they face difficulty in completing their labs. And if they did not have techie laptops or techie devices, obviously they had difficult time in completing their labs and then learning that particular programming language, let's say. Then accessibility of the learning tools. Accessibility to Zoom due to internet connection was an issue for many of the students. And some places, the university websites were not able to be accessed from outside the campus. And when we look at the university website, we know that students use webmail, they use Moodle, they use the university website for registration purpose, to view their invoice, to make regular payments, and the other services that the university provides. So due to connectivity issues, the students had difficulty in accessing these. And obviously the internet connectivity and speed was the major issue for the Pacific students, and access to the OERs, as I have mentioned before. Another and most important, I think, factor in regards to support was the support that was provided to the disability students or persons with disability. We know that we have this cluster in all our universities, and then when we look at the teaching and learning process, uh, we are still not sure how this content was delivered to the persons with disability. What did the disability center do in regards to this group of students? So they faced a lot of challenges as well, and probably we need another survey, or we need someone from the disability center to provide us ways in which support was provided to this group of people. So these were some of the things that came in from the students' end, and the challenges holistically, if we look at the challenges that were faced by the students, were device availability, internet connection, guides provided, how the navigation process, digital skills, and connectivity. So probably these are some of the factors that we can look on the next time we go online, and do something to improve the services that we as facilitators provide to our students during online teaching and learning. So that's all from my end, colleague. If you have any questions, then probably we can discuss.
Thank you, Pritika. That was wonderful. I think you covered a number of issues there, right from student characteristics to instructor characteristics, learning design, and the support that is given to students. And I think it's great to have that information from the Pacific, and to be able to better understand how we meet the needs of Pacific learners. So on that note, any comments or questions? Anyone wants to share what they have experienced? Remember, we've got today's session is a very informal conversation. We're looking forward to hearing about your experiences as well. Anyone? I'll take, while someone's thinking of any comments or anything that they want to share. Welcome to those that have just joined while Pritika was talking. Swati, Vilyame, Lavinia, and Salu. Welcome. Drop your emails in the chat and we'll put you on our mailing list and also send you a certificate of attendance and the flyer for the next webinar. Anyone has a comment, or shall we come back to the comments at the end? Might do that. We'll keep carrying on. We've got Swaran who's going to talk about some of those challenges further. So over to you, Swaran.
Bula Binaka, and it's great to see our colleagues online, and 3 of us are in the same room today. And a big shout out to NTPC FNU for allowing us to use one of the rooms. So since we started off with these webinars, that was last year, early last year. Please do correct me, Jalal, if I may give out some misinformation. So we've had virtual webinars, and it's wonderful to see at least 3 of us from the team in one room. And as much as we'd like to have Dr. Anand here with us, I believe we can do that in the near future. I think I can see some of my current students, some of our industry representatives online. So very warm welcome to all of you. Just adding on to what my colleagues here have already mentioned. So yeah, there's some very interesting study findings that Pritika has mentioned. And in fact, there was another one that we recently did, focusing on persons with disabilities. So basically to do with the digital literacy. So Pritika would be able to elaborate more on that later on. But that study has not been extended to the South Pacific Islands yet. But we have been able to derive some remarkable results from that as well. So just adding on to what my colleague Pritika has already mentioned, we have started to do some work around inclusion for persons with disabilities, particularly on the digital platforms. So firstly, I just wanted to shed some light on the statistics that we currently have on hand. So first of all, let's talk about the digital divide in the country. I would talk about Fiji in particular for now, and then we can talk about the Pacific very soon. So we have over 650,000 smartphones in the country. This is according to Dr. Fong, by the way. So we found out about this last year, somewhere around mid last year. Okay, and we have 3 ISPs, internet service providers in the country, and our population is just under 1 million. We also have 3 major tertiary institutes, plus we have many more that offer online and flexible modes. So I believe many would think that we have the right infrastructure in place to be able to successfully deliver online learning. However, as Pritika has mentioned, and as Dr. Jalal has mentioned, as Dr. Anand has mentioned as well, we see that this area still leaves a lot to be desired. Okay, so I wanted to share a little bit about understanding human-computer interaction. Not all users, not all online users, and not all students or participants learn in the same way. So if we talk about learning styles, so there's several learning styles which I believe most of us know about. But sometimes we tend to forget the fundamentals of different learning styles when we take the courses online. We start focusing more on the technology and more on the deliverables and less on how it is received. Okay, so human-computer interaction is definitely one area that focuses more on the psychology of the learner. So even as tech-savvy people, I will tell you very honestly, I don't always work very well with online learning platforms. There are times when I feel that I need my mental space and I need to be sitting next to my colleagues, and it helps me understand more about the research areas that I'm working in. So for that, I need to be in my office. I need to sit next to my colleagues. I need to have those random, those coffee chit chats. And sometimes you're just talking to your colleagues and all of a sudden something hits you and you start writing. Okay. So, and this is coming from someone who does a lot of online teaching and learning. So we do have some of these limitations, and we are human beings, and we need to accept that we do have these limitations. And we would probably be expecting a little too much, especially from our Pacific students, because we do understand we do face the digital divide, right? So, and again, if we want our people to be sharing the digital spaces, let me also highlight that digital rights is also known as a fundamental human right now. So if we see digital rights as a human right, we also need to understand that the digital divide still exists, and there is so much that we can do at the moment in terms of the resources we are providing. And also the ISPs out there, the ISPs have also assisted a lot during both the first and the second wave. While we were using Moodle, our students were reassured that it will not consume any data of this. But then we became quite specific on the tools that we are using. So if there's any student who is using a simulation package, that will definitely consume data. Okay, so that means we are restricting our students to only one learning style, which becomes quite contrary to what we have been preaching all this while about understanding and including different types of learning techniques and styles. Okay, so cybersecurity is obviously another very big area of concern. So just as we're using the roads, we are cognizant of the protocols. We understand that there has to be some basic safety and security measures that we need to understand about. Similarly, we need to understand about the cyber world and the dangers lurking around it. And then that in relationship, that in relation to the types of learners we have. We've had students, even at FNU, we've had students who are less than 18. Okay, they're less than the legal age of adults. So they definitely would be facing more vulnerabilities compared to our industry students, compared to our students who are studying different types of subjects. So understanding about the type of students we have, and even in Fiji, we also know that there are many students out there who have had only 1 hour of internet in the week. I've actually had conversations with market vendors, and they have told me how they have been coping with the pre and post COVID era. So it has been quite challenging for them as well. So with only 1 hour of internet time and one laptop that everyone in the family shares. So these are some of the challenges. And going back to the digital divide, some of the other pressing issues we have is, of course, remote connectivity. And so these are things, when an ISP, I would like to refer to one of the statements that an ISP had made, that we would like to assist the government in reducing the digital divide. So this is one statement, but there's so many aspects to it. So even, for example, in order for an ISP to deploy network connectivity in a remote area, even that remote area needs to be economically viable for that ISP, for them to operate. So of course, these are interrelated issues. And it's not just depending, obviously we have been advocating for online learning and teaching, but when we are trying to include our citizens who live in the rural areas, in even the marinas for that matter, then we have to understand the ISPs are still quite challenged, and we cannot impose too much on them either, because they need to have an ROI, they need to see an ROI as well. So for that, we need to have enough economic activity happening in those areas too. So reducing the digital divide is not as easy as it may sound. It may just sound like one sentence, but there are many, many elements to it. Okay. And as Pritika had mentioned, inclusion of persons with disabilities. This is also one of the areas that Pritika and I both work together in. So there are many, I'm very sure that there's so many content creators today who have absolutely no idea about some internationally accepted standards. Some simple ones like WCAG, W3C at a very basic level, right? Or even or even a basic idea of WHO standards pertaining to disabilities. And when we talk about inclusion on the online platforms, are we only talking about having closed captioning? Because there are many times when, we even sit in seminars and they talk about inclusion of persons with disabilities, but it's mostly limited to closed captioning for persons who are deaf and hard of hearing, or text to voice and voice to text for persons who have visibility limitations. But what about persons who have learning disorders, autism, attention deficit disorder, Asperger's syndrome, right? Physical disabilities. They all come with their own, challenges, but we are sort of imposing so many students to understand in just one way. And that becomes a large challenge. On the same note, I just wanted to share a little bit of information about how we have ventured in this area. So I've had some students who dropped out last year, and they said, we would rather sit in a class and have our tutors and trainers and lecturers in front of us and do group work with our colleagues right next to us. So they withdrew from the programs, and some of them are now, they're actually now in class, and they're doing quite well. So we do talk about digital rights and we do talk about online learning and teaching, but we also need to acknowledge and understand and appreciate the fact that not all learners like the online platform, which is why studies as the one that Pritika has mentioned, that's very important for us to understand our limitations and how we can improve on them. And of course, we do have the marginalized communities. Another important point that this is something that I had in fact noticed in Savu Savu in the year 2020. So I had met a lady who was in her late 30s and she was a grandmother already. So she told me something about, she had some questions about her reproductive health. And these are some very simple things that can be addressed with just a simple free app. Okay. And this is the very first time she had heard about something like this. So of course, there was lots of risks around the way that her reproductive health was being managed. So when I spoke to her, I realized how real the disparity is. Because so it's quite a typical situation, especially in the Pacific Islands, where you have maybe one smartphone in the house, and which is usually held on to by the patriarch of the family. So we do have cultural challenges as well. So these are some of the aspects that would probably be beyond us for now, but we really need multi-stakeholderism in order to address these issues. Assignment submissions. For competency-based assignments, it was quite a struggle because students needed to have robust computer systems in order to submit assignments that had heavy practical elements in it. So one of the programs that my department trains on is TAFE Diploma in Advanced Network Technologies, which is basically we are trying to graduate network engineers. And 70% of their curriculum is practical. So we can do this through gamification and simulation, but it becomes very challenging for those students who do not have robust computer systems and stable internet connection. There is also an aspect of engaging students when we are teaching theory subjects. Sometimes we will just have participants who are just listening and they're not comfortable speaking online. If I could share an experience, earlier this week, I received a message from one of my students who said, and he's an online student. So this year we were quite flexible with our enrollments. We have students who they can join us online. They can also go through our recordings and do the submissions, the assignment submissions. And then we have students who are also face-to-face. So we've got students who are currently in industry, they're working students, and students who are just studying full-time. So we've invited any of these students to join any session. It's pretty much at the disposal. So I received a message from one of my online students who has been attending class this week. And he said, never ever am I going to miss any class. So I said, but you have been attending all the classes online. And he said, no, the impact is quite different when I'm in this space. and this guy is a very tech savvy person, right? So he feels that he is lagging behind in assignments or in the comprehension part of the assignment at least, just because he's not in this environment which is conducive to learning. So what I'm trying to say is that all the dynamics of learning, all the dynamics of the learning and teaching environment, ensuring that the learning environment is conducive to learning, those things still apply, even though our mechanism is now online. So the practical sessions were more challenging for my students. And luckily we did have a few months of face-to-face classes, of course, with all this COVID safe protocols in place. So we had our students over, and then we took them, we had to sort of readjust in several ways. And then we took them through the practical sessions, one after the other, for about 2 months. We also had some staff going down to Lambasa and different areas where we've got students even in the outer islands, and we were able to take them through the practical classes. So yes, we do have our limitations. We also were trying to give daily updates about the sessions, and we made plans together. So all these things about teamwork and doing things in an inclusive way, we had to work on our own skills as trainers. So many times I had students calling me after hours, only because that is when Zoom is working for them, or that is when they have better network, or that is when they can actually hold on to the phone that somebody else is currently, use the phone that somebody else is currently holding on to. So these are some of the real challenges we had, and we had to make reasonable adjustments wherever possible. And yet I would definitely say that we still have a lot to do. Okay, so that's just a bit from my side. I'm happy to take any questions, any comments. I do know that we have some participants here who, some of my friends and colleagues who are also involved in research, and some of my current students. I can see some online students and some students who have opted for face-to-face classes. We'd love to hear your experiences.
Thank you, Swaran. That was very insightful. I mean, hearing about all of those challenges and thinking about what that means for that learner's experience, I think that's something that we need to think about. When I thought about, what am I going to talk about today and what I wanted to share, there were 3 key lessons I wanted to share, and I think this touches quite well with what Swaran was talking about as well. One of the points is, that design your course for the online environment. I know over the last 18 months to 2 years, we've had this flurry of online activity, and sometimes you've had courses, just been transferred across from how they were taught face-to-face to that online environment, and it simply doesn't work. You don't get that learning experience that you can in an online environment. So that's one of my first points. Don't simply transfer your face-to-face course directly to an online environment. Think about the design. Have a look at what has worked internationally, what has worked regionally, and what has worked locally. And what I would suggest is adapt rather than adopt. So adapt to your subject area needs, adapt to what your learners' needs are, and adapt to your own teaching pedagogy. Let your teaching pedagogy inform that design of that online learning environment. So that's the first key point that I wanted to talk to you about. The second thing, when I thought about my own experiences, was think about engagement. The design should facilitate engagement, create a teacher presence. And there's a number of ways that you could do this. From my own experience, I've used introduction videos. I've given, timely feedback. Having good, clear guidelines and communication facilitates your online presence as well. And I kind of wrap up this session, bring together all of those ideas that have been discussed in the resources, the engagement sessions I've had. So I bring this together in a video that students can watch. Consider visual design as well. ensure that there is constructive alignment, which will help create engagement. So ensure that there is constructive alignment between resources and activities, between the session and the overall course learning outcomes. Signpost how each session or each link links or contributes to the course learning outcomes as well. What I found is, if you want to engage students online, keep those recorded resources short, under 15 minutes. I try and keep mine under 10. Have resources in different formats and types. And I think Swaran and Pritika have talked about the different learning styles. So have a variety of resources as well that cater to different needs. So have presentations, have podcasts, have animated videos, voiceover recordings. Consider an engagement session as well, because students do like to come together. They do like to learn from each other. And it gives you, as the teacher, a sense of where the students are at as well. So I always have weekly Zoom sessions to complement all of my resources in a particular course. And it gives me an opportunity to touch base with the students and to support their learning needs better as well. Also consider self-review and peer engagement activities. And these could be quite simple, from worksheets to crosswords for self-review activities to discussion forums for peer review activities. And the third thing that I wanted when I thought about my own practice was think about their learner accessibility. And I know this has been talked about by Pritika and Swaran as well. So one of the perspective that I come from is that design perspective. So have a consistent design to facilitate ease of navigation. So consider things like the font type and size. Consider image and video size. Consider the look and feel, the color schemes that you use, and keep these consistent across your course. Consider the structure, keep a consistent structure across the course so learners can find things easily, they can navigate the course easily. As I said, use multiple formats to accommodate different learner styles. So, diagrams, pictures, videos, podcasts, presentations, animated videos, etc. Consider learner access to devices. And I know Pritika and Swaran have spoken about this as well. Ask yourself some questions. Do they have a computer? Do they have access to a computer? Are they accessing your course from a tablet or a mobile device? And more students are now. So when you are designing your course, it may look great on the computer, but think about how it looks when you access it from a mobile device or a tablet. Think about the devices that students own. Are they sharing a device? Is this device being shared across the family? Do they have one? And I know Swaran pointed that out as well. And Pritika found out as well that in her study in the Pacific that there is sharing of devices. So how would this impact on learning? Consider internet connectivity and speeds, because this will determine the resources that you can or should develop and the activities that you use. You don't want to develop something that students cannot access because they just don't have the internet speed. It's a waste of your time and effort, but it also does not accomplish what you intend to do in that course. And I suggest that you get feedback from students throughout the course, different points, so you can continue to improve the course. Often universities have systems where they can collect this data at the end of the course, which may be useful for making improvements to future course iterations, but it does not help the current learner. So have a midpoint survey where you can get some of this data and improve your own teaching for this current student. And finally, be innovative in your practice and have fun with it. And I think that comes across when you're having fun, when you're engaged, the students will also be engaged. On that note, I'm going to open it up to the floor. We've got lots of people here now. People have been joining throughout the presentations. So we're going to open it up. Please share your experiences. If you're students, what was your experience like during the last 2 years? We've had more and more courses online during COVID. What have you encountered? What has worked for you? What hasn't? Now, don't all rush at once and,
While others are thinking, if I might jump in, just a little comment, actually, if I may, Jalal. I think it's very, very important. Your last point over there was about having fun. I think that's actually so important. If you're not going to enjoy it, not going to enjoy it, your students certainly will not enjoy it as well. So it's very, very important to enjoy the experience as well. Yes, it is challenging, as I mentioned early on. Online learning is not easy. It is hard. But if you attempt to do online learning with an open mind, with an opportunity to sort of engage with new technologies, in new ways of engaging, and use the technology that exists there to inform your teaching practice, I think you're going to have a lot of fun as well, and your students will enjoy that experience as well. And another note is that collaboration is so important. I mean, it's so important to promote collaboration between students, get them to talk to each other. The value of incidental communication that students often have in the corridor, when they're buying a sandwich at the canteen, for example, etc., is so important. And moving online is, for many students, it's a very lonely experience. So if we are able to bring them together and sort of promote them and get them to communicate with each other, I think that would certainly help in the learning process.
I agree, Pranit. Anyone from our attendees that wants to comment, share anything? Yeshu, you said you were a student. I'm sorry I'm picking on you. What was your experiences like?
So I'm a student and I'm attending, I'm doing a diploma here in FNU. And yeah, my experience over the past few months as I'm attending to this course is quite effective for me, because the way I see online platform versus face-to-face, it is making our lives like more easier in terms of learning, and actually making assessments being either not being submitted individually. We are having group submissions, and this collaboration makes us more in terms of the way we think and critical thinking, as I say. There is my experience, and whatever we have discussed and whatever Madam Swaran has elaborated on, Pritika and Sir, we are students, and as far as we understand where you come from, we understand that you also have a delivery to be done as educators. So my thought over this is that it has just made us more into the ease of communication, I would say. And basically whatever we are learning, it will eventually be effective.
Thank you, Yeshu, for sharing. That's interesting points that you make about the ease of communication and how it has helped you, that online learning. What has other people's experiences been like? Anyone else wants to share? Oh, we had
Hi everyone, this is Pinky. Basically, as a student, I would put myself as a student and also as a trainer. I was a student of QUT during this whole process. But I was a research student, so maybe I did not, I wasn't affected, I would say, that way. I was able to meet with my trainers and all, but also as a trainer, at the moment I am teaching TAFE students, just like Swaran, here in Sydney. And I would definitely say that currently I'm also facing similar issues that Swaran has highlighted. One major issue I would say as IT trainers is when your students are online, they are on totally different platforms. Some are using Windows, as an operating system, some are using Mac, and that also, as a trainer, I guess it becomes quite difficult when you're designing your content, or when you're actually providing students with the applications that they need to use, because at the back of our mind, we have to be sure which student is using what kind of operating system. So yeah, it gets difficult. And when they have to do practical, I would say practical assessments, then that's another story. So yeah, it gets really difficult.
Thank you, Pinky, for sharing. I agree, you know, when you have different devices, you know, even when it's a PC or a Mac, or even tablets or mobile phones that students log in from, it does impact your ability on how you design those courses. Anyone else? We still have more people joining. So wonderful to see you guys here. Anyone else wants to share anything that they've encountered in online learning? What has your experience been like?
Bula, my name is Anissa, and I'm on a blended mode at the moment with Ms. Ravindra. What I liked about online learning is that it was more flexible to us. At certain period of the month, we are usually held back for, because I'm also working at the moment at Digital. So at certain months, I'm unable to make it on to class, but which is why this online is flexible for me. But then whilst I can also attend classes on site, it's very more knowledgeable to learn from other students, whereas when I'm online, I'm alone, like I don't get to hear from other students' backgrounds. And as for the training, yeah, and most of our trainers were more knowledgeable about the stuff they teach us, and they get to teach us with what is like happening in the world around us now. Yeah, so I would say both is very good. While online learning, I'm alone, but I'm flexible during in regards to my working hours. But then when I'm on site, I get to learn a lot from other students who are in class. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. I think those were points that we've heard as educators over and over from students. I mean, I haven't been involved in TAFE type courses, so it's very interesting to hear some of those things coming from TAFE courses that we hear with our students who are doing, say, undergraduate degrees. And I think that's what I hear quite commonly, you know, that they do like online learning, but they miss that face-to-face interaction. You know, it is quite isolating. But we do have a slight difference when I talk to postgraduate students who seem to favor online learning over face-to-face classes. And it just gives them a lot more what you were saying around flexibility of being able to learn, continue to work as well. Anyone else wants to share their experiences? I mean, there's still a few people we haven't heard from. It'd be great if you have any experience, anything that you want to share. Got Pranit, Pritika, and Swaran. If you want to add to anything, feel free to do so as well.
Actually, Dr. Jalal, I would like to add something. When we look at online learning, obviously we look at a few important things on the list. For example, device availability, we look at internet connection. But apart from these, I strongly believe that digital literacy skills or digital competency of the student, they are very important, because through the various studies that have been conducted after especially COVID-19, this is also from students' perspective, it has been found. It is sort of like an equation. Students tend to have positive attitude and perception. They tend to enjoy the courses, and eventually they tend to be successful completing a course if they are equipped with appropriate digital literacy skills. So probably maybe what we as academics or educationists should do is we should try to improve or do something about the digital skills of the students before we focus on other aspects of digital learning or online learning. So that's what I wanted to add. Probably if anyone would agree with me, or you might have noticed that students who know or have appropriate digital skills, they tend to be more active in class, and they tend to be more open when we have discussions, or they tend to perform better when it comes to assessments, submissions, or completion of courses.
Thank you, Pritika. I know someone's added a comment. Galaxy A02, sorry, you haven't added your name there, so I'm going to have to say that as your name. And she said, he or she said that they find online learning very effective, but also challenging. And one of the challenges is poor internet connectivity as a student. This is also a motivation factor which has dragged me to always work and submit in advance. Okay, that's interesting. So because of your internet connectivity, you plan your work in such a way that you'll submit in advance because you don't know what your internet will be like on that day. So that's quite interesting. It's good that you're so well prepared. That's a motivating factor. I have a lot of students who submit 1 minute before the due date, due time. But I can see Renaz has got her hand up. Renaz.
Hi, I'm listening in from my home. I'm a lecturer at Fiji National University. Just would like to share my thoughts on students' experiences of online learning. The first point that I would like to reflect on is that going online was mandatory, like it was a push and it was a need at that time. But going online has implications, I think, for second language learners. I think we need to also think of our learners who are learning in a second language, and everything that we present in an online platform is actually in the second language. So I found that students had difficulty understanding the instructions for particular assignments and other things, and therefore they needed us to support them, translate that. So probably it is there are a lot of papers that have been written post-COVID about experiences of students, but I think there needs to be a focus on a special attention given to especially Pacific Islanders, for whom English is not the mother tongue and it is a second language. So what are some of the challenges that second language learners, as well as instructors, we instructors are also second language learners, so we need to also explore the challenges that learners face in navigating an online platform in a language that is not their own. So probably their underperformance or the struggles that they have is probably not due to technological factors. It may be due to the understanding of instructions and the course requirements, and that also is a demotivating factor for them. And the second thing in my experience was that when we went online, even if we go online, simultaneously students do many units at the same time. So students actually experience fatigue in terms of simultaneous submission of assignments, forum discussions, quizzes in all the assignments. So probably going forward, we need to reflect on mapping of assignment submissions across courses that students do, because they don't only do one particular course. So these are two of my reflections, while other discussions that have taken place, they also resonate, they are also important, but these two were the two critical ones that I wanted to bring to discussion. Thank you.
Very interesting, Renaz. I think those were very interesting points. I think that mapping of assessments, when it's due, what types of assessments needs to happen across the program. So you have a variety of assessment points, a variety of assessments across the program, but also there is sometimes what I'd call death by assessment. because you have so many assessments as a student that, you have to try and get through. You have, in some courses, you'll have, attempt 10 discussion forums and submit your best 3 for grading, So we really do need to re-look at what, and I think this is Pranit's earlier point about how we're assessing students, the number of assessments. Is it necessary to have that many assessments? Can we achieve the same learning outcome with fewer assessments? So I think online learning has given us some of that opportunity to re-look at how we're assessing. And Pranit, if you wanted to add to what you were saying earlier on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that those were some really important points that were being made, and what you mentioned, death by assessment, for example. And as I mentioned early on, assessment practices are a cornerstone of our education ecosystems, and it's very important to sort of focus on that. As David Bowd, for example, many of you would have read David Bowd is a guru in assessments, for example, at Deakin, for example. He often talks about students can often escape bad teaching, but they can't escape bad assessment. Assessments are so important, and you're right. Both Renaz mentioned, you mentioned Jalal at the same time as well. Many of our assessment practices are legacy practices that we have been using for a very long time, not because we don't know any other way of doing it, just because, well, it's something that we do in the end. It's something that we've done for the last 10, 20 years. And I think one of the things that if you take something away from the whole online learning experience, it is focusing on our assessments and really looking at, is exam the best way to assess this particular learning outcome? Is a report the best way to assess this learning outcome, for example? Can we do something a little bit different? Remembering also at the end of the day, it's all a sampling of students' performance at a particular time anyway. You know what I mean? You cannot ever assess every single thing that you have taught in class. So it is a sampling, and as long as you sort of treat that as such, and have an assessment instrument that is engaging, that promotes learning, for example, is collaborative, works well in the online environment, I think it's a good way probably to do that.
Definitely, Pranit. I know students, my experience with students is when they look at assessments, that's what they see in that. So they're driven by that assessment rather than the learning that they should receive in that course. So coming back to students, what are your experiences like? I know we'll finish off shortly, but I just wanted to get some more from our attendees. What are your experiences? What do you have anything that you want to share? Anyone, final opportunities to anyone, panel attendees, to share anything else that they want to before we close our session for today. Swaran, go for it, Swaran.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to make a few closing points. So I was listening to some of the comments by Renaz, and I completely agree with her. In fact, as a technologist, I would say that one of the most important things for us to understand is that when we're designing any form of technology, it is absolutely important for us to include the end users. They're the most important stakeholders. So, part and parcel of that is understanding the need to be multilingual. At least at a very basic level, we need to include the languages that are quite prominent in that particular Pacific island. In this case, in Fiji, we would have Ituke, Fiji Bat, and some of the languages that are in the Pacific. And there's so many languages in the Pacific. So we really need to start customizing and adapting, as Jalal has already mentioned. I just wanted to share some of the things that I did, and these were the things that I found it helped me as a trainer, as well as and an educator as well as my students to cope with the online learning world, especially during lockdowns. It was quite challenging because you'd hear the sounds of ambulance sirens almost all day. And this is, I'm talking about the most scariest part of the second wave, where we did not really know what's happening and what is going to happen in future. But we still had to just hang on tight to each other and just move on. So there were times when I was taking a class while cooking. So we need to be, very much accepting of the idea that while we are talking, we will probably have a child jumping over our head, or we might have our pets looking into the screen. And so there are times when I also talk to my students' children. And there are times when they greet me before my student does. So just to create an environment of, more an accepting environment so that we feel comfortable in times of crisis. That's also very important, because we also face the same type of anxieties. So we just need to be there for each other in this case. Another thing that I found was quite helpful, I did a certification last year, Microsoft Certified Educator, which focused on 21st century learning styles. So it integrated technology as well as all the paradigms of learning and teaching environment. And I found it quite helpful. So, and yes, of course, we also need to understand how much time, or we need to ascertain how much online time is supposed to be perceived as healthy. Personally, for me, I used to get a lot of migraine attacks as well. So the types of technology we choose, it needs to, that is where HCI, human-computer interaction, comes into play, understanding the psychology behind technology and how it resonates with the end user. Also the question of over-assessing. Recently, I think I have some of my students online today, and they were quite happy to hear that I have scraped off some of the assignments. Of course, I needed to take permission for that, but especially when we have competency-based assessments and practicals, it's already challenging to have them online. And then we are, we used to have death by PowerPoint. As presenters, we were told not to try not to commit that. And now we have, so many assessments. So having different types of assessments, if you are trying to assess a certain competency, is there any other way other than written reports? If it can be done in the form of a meeting, if it can be done in the form of a role play, if it can be interactive, I guess it becomes more fun, right? And what I am still doing at the moment, because I do have a session, I'm currently taking about 9 hours of training in a day, but this is quite mixed. So I have online students, I have students face-to-face, and then some have preferred to be, because it, as I said, it is quite at their disposal, now. So they're welcome to attend any session they like. And then I've also got some students from last year, because they had no other choice but to take on the online mode. So I've also invited them if they would like to come and sit in those particular sessions that I'm taking right now. And they may have done the same unit last year, but this could be a refresher. So I've just tried to complement the learning styles and the learning experiences. So even now, when we're about to start a class, I show them what's up on Moodle. This is what we have. How far have we come? Just to complement whatever we have online. So we are also talking about the things that are due. We're also talking about which methods to follow, just to understand that everyone is on the same page, and to also allow flexibility. So I found these techniques quite helpful. And there were times when some of my students have been sharing some things, and then we have these sessions where we just, Pacific style, a story or Talanwa session, where we don't talk about assignments or the curriculum. We talk about a topic that everyone is passionate about. So these are just some of the things that I found helpful to during the time that we had no other choice but to cope with the crisis. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Swaran. Anyone else? Any final comments from anyone else before I close off? Ashutosh.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Sorry, I did join in late, but I just saw the chat and I saw the comment of over-assessing. I think I would agree. Swaran and I would have had the same issue as we're teaching TAFE diploma, and we were given certain assessments from TAFE, and at times the assessments that were for students that were I think it was an overload for students. And with the with COVID, we had a huge challenge where students were not able to complete the assessments. So what we had to do, I think the other alternative that we came as a department was that why don't we try and incorporate the assessments in the teaching. I think that is one of the way that has, I think it has worked wonderful for us as trainers, as and it is not a pressure for the students as well when they are learning online and when they're doing the assessment. So it also we kind of also got rid of that over assessment thing that was there before, and we are able to get the competency is achieved by for the students as well. And students are, I think they're not that much pressured on assessments for that. Yeah, then that's from my own. Thanks.
I think that's important to have an appropriate study workload for students and having an appropriate number of assessments, but also, you know, when you're designing the course, appropriate number of activities and resources. Sometimes you come across courses that have 10 journal articles to read in that week. And do you think, you know, students are going to read that or watch, you know, 4 hours of videos? So I think that appropriate workload encompasses all of those points. That's a great point, Ashutosh. Anyone else wants to make a final comment? Well, I'm going to finish off then. I'm going to say I am a fan of online learning. I find it quite intimate, and I get a view of my students' lives. They turn on their cameras. They share with me how they live. Their bedroom, their personal spaces. I get this insight and understanding that I normally don't have. And I, allow that to happen with my students as well. They get an insight of how I live. I don't use a filter when I'm teaching. I share with them my home environment. They share with me their home environment. It's kind of that connection building with the students as well. I have, as Swaran was saying, you get to know students intimately. You get to know their families. You get to know their pets walking across the screen. My cat does that quite often, and you see that tail going across the screen. I know children's babies. I know their names of their children who pop in and wave to me, and they get to know me. So there's something special about online learning in that sense. And on that note, I'm going to say more to everyone. Thank you for joining. It's great to be able to join from Fiji. So if you haven't put your email address, put it in the chat box so I can send you details of our next event. I'll add you to the mailing list, and I'll also send a certificate of attendance for those that have attended today. So thank you, More, and I look forward to seeing you at our next event in a month's time.